Special thanks to the first. So, you want to play Black Mage. Well, prepare for quite a trip because it's going to be a little bit different than what you're used to. Let's start off with singing a song of Ice and Fire. Black Mages don't have one, but two buttons that link to a combo chain. Fire and Blizzard. One is geared towards doing damage, and the other focuses on crowd control. Each button is linked to a 3-part combo chain that hits harder with each consecutive cast, with the third one hitting the hardest, and having a small explosion radius. The combos work by placing a 15-second buff on the Black Mage, which designates them to be in either Fire or Frost phase. Switching to the other element in the middle of a combo will replace the buff with its respective element, so you have to start over from the very beginning of the combo if you're wanting to do that. Both of these abilities also leave a lingering debuff on the targets they hit. They both can stack up to 3 times, but just like with the combo swapping, if you hit someone with the Fire debuff with a Frost spell, it will replace it with a Frost debuff. Now these debuffs don't really do anything by themselves, but you need to use another ability to trigger their effects, and that ability is called Super Flare. It's an incredibly wide area of effect that ignores line of sight, but it only affects the people afflicted with the aforementioned debuffs. It deals 3000 damage per stack of whichever debuff the enemy has on them, but it also triggers the debuff's effects. If the target had the Fire debuffs on them, it would apply a dot on the target that deals 3000 damage per tick. The first stack gives 2 ticks worth of the dot, with each additional stack only adding 1 tick of the dot. Now if the target had the Ice debuffs on them, the target would instead be inflicted by the Deep Freeze effect, which is a hard crowd control. The target would be stuck in this state for 1 second per stack consumed, up to a maximum of 3 seconds. So think of Super Flare as a detonator. Deciding whether to use Fire or Frost is entirely situational. If you believe your team can land a kill if given a few free moments on a target, then Frost is the way to go. But if you think your team better suited to a battle of attrition, then Fire would be the way to go. You also have an ability that you can use to cap off your debuff stacks instantly. That ability is called Paradox, a single target instant cast attack. Though it does a hefty amount of damage in and of itself, I do recommend you use it specifically to cap off your debuff stacks. It can yield to some really nasty combos when used effectively. Now regarding their defensive tools, Black Mages have a spell called Burst, which is kind of an odd one from a design standpoint. It applies a 12k potency shield to the Black Mage, but it also deals 12k potency to all enemies in a small radius around the Black Mage. This makes it the most powerful direct hit in Black Mage's toolkit outside of their limit break. Despite how powerful it is, I advise caution if you intend to use it for its offensive capabilities, as it requires you to be right on top of the enemy, and more often than not, if you're in poking range, you're uncomfortably close to death, because Black Mages have the lowest maximum health threshold in the game, right next to Sage, making them one of the best and easiest kill targets in the field. So you're gonna want to stay as far away as you can during any team fight, but if you really want to use the ability aggressively, then I really hope you're quick on your feet, which brings us to Black Mage's mobility option. Black Mages have 2 charges of ethereal manipulation which they can use to either engage to an enemy or disengage to an ally. And with only a 10-second cooldown to boot, they can use this ability rather often. On top of that, whenever a Black Mage does use this ability, they are granted Swift Cast, which makes their next cast time ability an instant cast. And if you really don't want to move anywhere, but still want the Swift Cast effect, you can just target yourself and use the ability, and you'll get Swift Cast without having to go anywhere. Despite not granting a shield, this is your primary defensive tool, because the best mode of defense for a Black Mage is by running away from their problems rather than taking them head on. So I recommend keeping at least 1 charge of this ability at all times as a contingency plan. Conversely, having Swift Cast on enables you to pull off some really nasty combos, so feel free to get creative. The last of their base abilities is called Nightwing, an AoE sleep spell. It works by first applying a half a sleep debuff on the target that lasts for 4 seconds, which doesn't really do anything on its own, so the target can still run around while it's on, but when it expires, the real sleep effect kicks in, which also lasts for 4 seconds. It's a hard crowd control that's broken on any direct damage taken, but if it is broken by a direct hit, the target will immediately be wounded for 8000 damage, on top of whatever hit broke the sleep. It's a bit of a premeditation play, but it can open up some really strong opportunities. So as temporary and easily broken as it is, don't sleep on it. And finally, their limit break. Make their staff go freaking crazy for a second, and then it turns the Black Mage into a walking rave party, which allows your next 6 Fire or Frost spells be instant cast for the next 30 seconds. And while this buff persists, you can only use the strongest versions of each element, with Flare for Fire and Freeze for Frost. Your limit break button also turns into the strongest ability in your kit, Foul, which is an instant cast ability that deals 16,000 damage. And just like Flare and Freeze, it also deals damage to all enemies in a small radius around your target. It doesn't apply the Fire or Ice debuffs though, so it's just raw damage you can throw out. By itself, it may not be too interesting compared to other limit breaks, but it is still very much a limit break not to be underestimated. It super boosts the Black Mage's AoE pressure in grouped up team fights, with Flare spam giving you an opportunity to spread more dots, and Freeze spam to give you an opportunity to lock down the entire enemy team. It's not a typical limit break that does everything by itself, as you do need to put a little work into it to get the most value out of it. But with a little bit of elbow grease, you can wipe the entire enemy team with proper timing. Speaking of timing, I advise caution when trying to activate this limit break in the heat of battle, because if you spam the limit break button while trying to activate it, you can accidentally queue up Foul, causing it to be used immediately. Now depending on the situation, this could be a good or bad thing, so I just felt like warning you all about that. Overall, Black Mages are about sustained pressure and control. Though they can do a decent burst, it is not their main focus. Black Mages are backline turrets that focus on team suppression more than anything else. However, being as reliant on cast times and as squishy as they are, they're a very easy job to deny. They do very poorly when focused, and without peels, there's very little they can do. So the performance of a black mage is quite reliant on the performance of their team. So if the team doesn't do too well, then the black mage is gonna have a rough time. But if the team does at least even decently well, the black mage is a monster on the field. Overall, it's a pretty solid job, though it's not the easiest to pull off. So with a little bit of patience and some extra practice, you'll be able to push your team through some stalemates and get yourself the winning point. I'd like to take a moment to thank all the chill folks on Patreon who help me do what I do. So thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it. Alright, that's about it. See ya!